Hi, everyone. In the second PowerPoint about Bill Clinton, I'm going to talk about a few key issues from Clinton's presidency. So let's go ahead and get started. Bill Clinton was the first presidential candidate to talk about gay and lesbian rights as a campaign issue. One of the objectives he had stated during the campaign was that he wanted to abolish the military's ban on gays serving in any branch of the American military. Now, at the time, most political pundits thought if Clinton wins the election, this is too controversial, divisive of an issue for him to really take up. Well, after Clinton won the election, this was actually the first major issue that he undertook. He ran into a lot of opposition from conservatives in Congress. There was opposition from the military. He ended up having to accept a compromise, what became known as the don't ask, don't tell policy. Historically, recruiters for any branch of the military had asked people being drafted or those who were voluntarily signing up to enlist had been able to ask them about their sexual orientation. And if a person said, yes, I'm gay, that was grounds to classify them as unfit for military service. So Clinton got that practice abolished, but he was not able at the time to get the ban on gay serving completely lifted. Later it would be. So there was, as I note, some disappointment from gay rights activists. But again, this is extremely significant, Clinton being the first candidate to talk about these issues and then making a serious effort to bring about change. Bill Clinton was one of only two 20th century American presidents who would leave office with a surplus in the federal budget. The other, as I note here, was Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s. Clinton revised the taxes as they were structured from Ronald Reagan's presidency. Remember the reading about Reagan. Reagan lowered taxes for Americans in higher income brackets. Clinton raised those again. Not a single Republican voted to approve the first Clinton federal budget. And this was a huge red flag about budget problems to come, and one of the first signs of the growing divisions between Republicans and Democrats that are so much a part of current politics, too. One of the controversial achievements of Clinton's presidency was passage of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. This was a concept that had actually been conceived during the presidency of Clinton's predecessor, Republican George H.W. Bush. Bush had supported NAFTA but wasn't able to get it passed through Congress. There was opposition from the Republican Party. There was opposition from the Democrats. There was support from other Democrats. There was support from some Republicans. NAFTA was extremely controversial and remained so. And you're probably aware that this was one of the issues that Donald Trump used in his campaign in 1960, and during his presidency has worked to replace NAFTA with a different agreement. Clinton was able to assemble a coalition of Republicans and Democrats sufficient to get this through Congress and the Senate, and NAFTA was passed. Proponents of NAFTA argued at the time that it would bring more jobs, greater prosperity by easing trade restrictions, and that would provide tangible results for American consumers in terms of better prices. It would help American workers by bringing more jobs here. Critics argued that those things wouldn't happen, or conversely, they argued that even if it helped trade, it would encourage American companies to move operations to locations where there was cheaper labor, primarily Mexico. And indeed, this is what happened. In terms of trade benefits, easing trade restrictions and lowering the costs of all sorts of things, especially that we buy at the grocery store that are imported from Canada or Mexico, NAFTA was beneficial. But as critics had feared, it led to a lot of American companies moving operations, particularly to Mexico, where there was a cheaper labor supply, less stringent labor laws. A whole host of things contributed to this. So NAFTA was controversial at the time. It has remained controversial during its history, but it's one of the significant achievements of Clinton's presidency. Another major effort that Clinton undertook that did not work out was his attempt to reform the nation's healthcare system. Clinton assembled a panel led by his wife Hillary Clinton. That was a controversial choice, although Hillary Clinton was totally qualified to do this. As I mentioned earlier, her specialty had been healthcare, medical law. The mistake Clinton made was not selecting a single Republican to serve on this healthcare reform panel. And the resulting bill that the panel produced was enormous. It was complex. Republicans picked it apart. There were a series of devastating television commercials that ran showing an older couple at their kitchen table struggling to understand all the aspects of this bill. That commercial was very impactful. So ultimately, this failed, although a lot of what Clinton's panel proposed are things that are part of our nation's healthcare system now, things like HMOs and PPOs. Clinton had really hoped to get, as I note here, a partnership between government and the private sector that would bring healthcare costs down and provide more affordable health care to more Americans. But he underestimated the political influence of the insurance industry. Clinton wanted them to be a partner at the table, and the role of the insurance industry in healthcare decisions, as our healthcare system currently works, is one of our biggest problems. I can attest to this personally, as my wife is a nurse. She used to do case management, where she spent her days arguing on the phone with insurance companies that didn't want to approve procedures that doctors had prescribed for patients, and this is still a huge problem. So Clinton had hoped by including the insurance industry in these discussions that they would willingly reform that, and they weren't willing to go along. So Clinton's healthcare reform effort, significant in his presidency, but something that ultimately isn't successful. Clinton's primary nemesis was the Republican Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, a congressman from Georgia. In terms of their personalities, Clinton and Gingrich never got along. Gingrich was an extremely ambitious, opportunistic politician who had his eye on being a future candidate for the presidency himself for the Republican Party. Gingrich's ideas influenced what became the Tea Party movement during Barack Obama's presidency, and he really was highly influential to a number of younger Republicans who were coming into Congress at the time, a number of whom are still in Congress now. And he was going to lead much of the opposition to things that Clinton wanted to do. The Republican Party won control of both the House and the Senate in the 1994 elections, and this prompted Newt Gingrich in a famous press conference to declare that Bill Clinton was irrelevant, to use Gingrich's phrase, and Republicans would move ahead with their agenda that was called the Contract with America. The centerpiece of this, it had several parts, but the main thing Gingrich wanted to do was to reverse the fact that Clinton, as I noted a couple minutes ago, had raised taxes on wealthy Americans. Gingrich wanted to cut those, even lower than they had been during Reagan's presidency. How would you afford this? Well, Gingrich's plan was to offset that with cuts to the nation's Social Security program. So you can follow what I'm saying, what Gingrich was proposing to do essentially was to take money from one area to subsidize a tax cut for the wealthy. So if you cut taxes, the government is taking in less money. How are you going to make that up? Gingrich's idea is to take away Social Security, or reduce, I should say, Social Security benefits, which are important for a lot of Americans. And Clinton absolutely refused to go along with this plan. So this led to a prolonged standoff and eventually a shutdown of the federal government. We've become used to these, but back in the 90s when Clinton was president, this was a huge deal. This was before these federal government shutdowns became so commonplace. But despite a lot of arguing, wrangling, efforts by certain Republicans and Democrats to work out a compromise, Gingrich refused to budge on the centerpiece of the contract with America. Clinton refused to sign the budget. Gingrich predicted that Clinton would bear the blame for the federal government shutdown, and Gingrich turned out to be wrong. Public overwhelmingly blamed Gingrich and the Republican Party, and this was the beginning of Gingrich losing his political clout. A lot of other Republicans revolted from his leadership. Gingrich in the future was going to make repeated efforts to try to win the Republican Party nomination, but he never was really able to fully overcome this setback. So in 1996, and this is an election when Gingrich had been dreaming he might be the candidate, the Republican Party turned instead to a moderate Republican, Senator from Kansas, Robert Dole, longtime member of the Senate. Dole was a World War II veteran. Dole ends up losing to Clinton, but what's particularly significant about this election in 1996, the results were almost identical to when Clinton was elected in 92, is that this is the last time that a World War II veteran would run for the presidency. So the election is significant in that aspect primarily. So Clinton's domestic record as president was somewhat mixed. He was able to achieve some things by winning Republican support, but the broadening split between Democrats and Republicans would really contribute to Clinton's impeachment, and that's going to be the topic of our final PowerPoint as we look at Bill Clinton's presidency.